says it's recording in progress. I guess that means it started. Okay, well,
Yes.
welcome, Chloe, and welcome to anyone who may be watching this video. We're here at a Weaving Together Communities panel interview to share experiences with people who are weaving into intentional community and folks who are weaving together as co-founders and anyone who's involved in an intentional community project or eco-village. And just want to thank you to Chloe for stepping in and sharing your experiences with us. And in a moment, I'm going to invite you to introduce yourself, and we're waiting for our friend Will, who will probably pop in at any minute. And let's see, I want to say thank you and recognize Yeka, my friend, who is a part of an intentional community in Alabama, and her friend Odessa, who connected Chloe and I for this panel, and also Will. And thanks again to anyone who's watching this recording and for giving your thoughts and processing this information with us after the fact. My name is Valerian, and I'm coordinating this call with Snake Village, which is a commune I'm co-founding. And Snake Village is an animist-centric commune sharing art, power, and provisions with all for global solidarity with Indigenous ways. And so I just want to, at the beginning of this video, acknowledge that we are, all of us who will be on this call, on native land, and that we are on unceded land that has been stolen, and that there is a history of genocide and oppression that we are responsible for. And specifically where I am at is on the land of the Caddo people, and they are still alive 300 miles west of here, 187 years after being displaced, and they are experiencing their own resiliency in the face of continued oppression, and they are continuing to perpetuate their language and their culture. And the Guarani people invite us to acknowledge 4 parts. In a land acknowledgement, they invite us to acknowledge that all Indigenous people invite everyone to recognize that the earth is a living entity and not a resource, but is the provider of our lives, which is of course very important and central to any of the eco-village movement projects that are going on. Also, we are invited to recognize that all beings are related, and including the more than human community, and also the people who brought us together, the ancestors, and the ancestors who are yet to be born. And that adds more responsibility and accountability to the topics we'll be discussing here. And also that we're capable to meet in this peaceful way because of the continued systemic oppression that occurs, and the police force and all the things that keep private property in place. So we want to just recognize that, and just we also want to recognize what made this possible, and the people who made these spaces brought together possible. And that would be the coordination of all the people involved with this video, myself, Chloe, Will, but also the coordination of the lands that we're on. So I need to recognize the person who has taken care of the land that I'm on for 30 years, Jean Marie Zerger, who is a permaculture design instructor, and also my partner, Suzanne, who connected me in with this land. So Chloe, do you want to name the people whose land you're on, where you're at?
Sure, yeah. I appreciate that you are bringing that into this call. And I am living and grew up on Cherokee land. I definitely feel really connected with those people as well, though I have not done the historical work. I just feel connected. I grew up in Atlanta, and right now I live in Asheville, but yeah, it's all the same land.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And so that, you know, there's of course always things, and I just invite anybody watching this video to look for ways to connect and to build bridges with the people whose ancestral lands you're on, and to look for ways to rematriate the land and all the different things that we can do to involve ourselves and be good allies and be in justice. And just a thank you to anyone who's watching this video who may be indigenous to the land that they're on. And I invite you to continue to share and just honor your presence here to this video. So with that, the container setting for this video, I just want to invite us to think about just that we're here to respect each other, and that is pretty intuitive. I'm just going to leave it at that, but we, you know, just will be here in a space of mutual respect. And so with that, I'm going to invite us to do introduction rounds, chance for each person to talk. And Chloe, you're the only person here, so this will be an interview. If Will doesn't wind up making it with the technical difficulties that he may be facing, he's facing. So the question is, could you briefly share your story with the intentional community and what you'd like to contribute to this call, and anything else you want to share about yourself?
Yeah, so as you can see, I am part of and have co-founded the Whole Systems Network. Me and my partner, business partner and life partner, Leonie, founded this, and hers and my story is that we met at a global Ecovillage network event at her Ecovillage, which she grew up in for 35 years. And yeah, that's a magical story. And to rewind how I got involved with the Ecovillage movement, the global Ecovillage network, Austin Permaculture Guild, so many different weaving pieces. But when I was 19, I dropped out of college and said, you know, like, this is not a place for an environmental activist. Like, I don't need to go to college in order to like put myself on a tree in the rainforest or you know, chain myself to railroads, etc. And it was really an amazing experience to go the Greenpeace semester where they were actually teaching college students how to do activism on their campus and elsewhere. And after that, I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna do college right now. So I dropped out, and I found a place called Valhalla Movement in Montreal, Quebec, and I went 1,000 miles away and lived there for 6 months on my own. And I quickly realized one of the reasons I even decided to stay is like, I realized how inspiring it was to be in a place like that where they're trying to learn how to become an intentional community in a permaculture land site. And it was really great and harmonious, and there was a lot of, you know, knowledgeable and inspiring people there, yet they didn't know how to organize. They didn't know, you know, how to hear each other fully out and how to create community agreements and all those things that at that point in my life was very intuitive to me. Obviously, I had not learned much because it was new for me, but I just spoke my truth, and they allowed me to. And I told them what I was seeing and experiencing, and they said, you know, we want you here and involved. So I supported them with aligning their vision and mission and aims for the 6 months I lived there, and of course learned so much in the process. So from there, I you know, said like, this is not going to be my only experience and of intentional community, but I knew that it was my journey. And you know, 10 years later, I'm still on that journey. but I experienced many different ones, and from there I learned about the Youth Eco-Village Network, or Next Gen in North America, Next Gen North America, and I really just got more and more intertwined with the movement as it went on. I became a coordinator of the larger North American Global Eco-Village Network, and I got to learn from a lot of the elders in the movement and facilitate their agenda, which I was obviously very honored and excited to do. And yeah, I think I'm a little bit tangenting here, but I really appreciate the elders' perspectives, and I've learned from many different elders for a long time throughout my journey. So yeah, a Whole Systems Network now hosts a course called Grounding Your Village, and it is all about creating intentional community eco villages, and me and my partner host it. And we also bring in wisdom from other people, because I don't think that two people have all the knowledge themselves, and I won't claim that. So I'll stop there, and I'm sure we'll get into other pieces with Valerian's great questions.
All right, thank you for sharing, Chloe. And again, if Will pops in, we'll just ask him the same question for the introduction round. Thank you for all you just shared. Let's go right into the questions then, for the interview and the panel. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but looking back to when you first encountered communal living, what insights and encouragement would you want to give to yourself back in time from the experiences that you've gained with all that you just talked about?
Yeah, that question, can you rephrase it? I read it, but I didn't ask you to clarify.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you're asking for rephrase. So let's see that I guess if you're looking back, and maybe if you're sitting here having a chance to talk with yourself first getting involved in the intentional communities movement, and you know, what would be some things that you'd want to share? Maybe what would be even some questions that you'd have for yourself looking back in time, and then also what encouragement would you want to give, or what would you want to say in general? Whatever.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I understand. I think that's great. If I were to go back in time and tell my 19 or 20-year-old self, I think I would say, you know, don't be so naive, own the gifts that you have. That not all of the people in the Global Eco-Village Network have the best intention, or they might have the best intention, but they don't know how to follow through. And that can really hurt. So don't trust everything at face value, unfortunately. And that being said, it's really worth fighting for. It's worth staying in the movement. It's worth learning about this. And I would tell myself you're on the right track, because since I was 18, 19 years old, I have followed my intuition, and it's gotten to get me to places that I feel really grateful to have experienced. I don't think I regret anything I've done or learned about. And yeah, I would love to tell myself maybe more in 20 years, because I don't regret it right now, and I'm curious where my career will take me as an eco-village consultant. So 10 years from now, then talking to my 19-year self, we'll see where that takes me.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. That's it's really always good to hear some of the advice that people have, especially with the new people coming in. And thank you for being honest and giving a deep look at that.
Mm.
So I'll move on to the next question. What are so this is getting into some of the nitty gritty of community living, and maybe when people don't get those, maybe when people don't really live out the intention, or they don't know the intention, or they don't have good intention. But what are maybe underneath that, maybe some of the things that aren't usually spoken, some of the common misconceptions you've identified most on your journey that people bring when exploring an intentional communal living situation for the first time? What are some things that maybe they have expectations about, or can't see, or think is the case? Maybe living in a different movie than the community. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the people I experience regularly are people that are trying to build intentional community, except they're missing the intentional piece. So what they're really saying is, I'm buying some land with some friends and we'll see how it goes. And I don't find that to be intentional community. And I don't find it to be viable or sustainable. There's rare scenarios that will work out, but at the end of the day, you know, what we're claiming and trying to create is a village, and villages take a lot of work and systems in place, and like I said before, not everyone can do it all. You have to bring in different pieces, and you have to acknowledge that those different pieces exist. And so, yeah, I would say, like, yeah, that's what for a lot of the newbies that are either trying to visit community or trying to build their own, usually build their own because they don't want to visit others and they want to recreate the wheel. And there's so many people, one that come to me, there's some constant amount of people coming to me and saying, I have this idea, Chloe, I want to create a website and I'm going to put everything that's missing and I'm going to connect all the pieces, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. And I was that person, you know, like 3 or 4 years ago, because I hadn't heard about the different elders or the different pieces and all of the evolving. But, you know, everyone is recreating the wheel over and over. This movement has officially, the eco-village movement has happened since the 91, really. The intentional community movement, although it grew in the 70s, even started you know, when people are colonizing the US, there is history of intentional community. And of course, you know, tribally, and that's something I really appreciate from the Global Eco-Village Network, is acknowledging that there are still villages all over on a very indigenous level. And and that's claiming that they know the best or they have the best ways. Yet I do think that they're still existing and living, and the only reason that they've stopped to degrees is because of colonization throughout the world. So they know how to get along, and that's, for me, one of the biggest pieces. A lot of people talk about permaculture. They think that they can create permaculture homesteads with a group of people, and then yet again they're talking about external things. They're not talking about the co-creation aspect, what it really takes, and the investment piece. So yeah, there's legal systems in place, there's business systems in place, and unfortunately we do need to know all the legal loopholes and actualities and business actualities to create something that's successful in the world today. So, and I say that it's unfortunate because obviously we would love to just be able to be like, oh, there's some land and let's build on it. Yet it's not the case, and there's reasons for that for sure, but it's not that easy. But there are ways, you know, if you talk to experts, there are ways to do it, and there's really inspiring and exciting ways to do it.
Absolutely. So yeah, that is really close to home maybe some of what Snake Village is experiencing and what we're looking forward to and learning from. So it's good to hear even just knowledge and wisdom for our village. So, you know, kind of looking at what we've learned from indigenous villages and the thousands of them that are still thriving around the world, and as you mentioned, to what degree they aren't. It has to do with colonization, but it's one bit of wisdom has really, you know, or one of many bits of wisdom that has really shined through, that's continued to remind us and help to evolve sort of you know, some of the more naive projects that have come up, that have needed to come up without really knowing everything, that have tried to reinvent the wheel and have done the best they could. There's this idea of conflict transformation that's been an important part of the movement, and looking at conflict not so much as a problem or an issue to be resolved or to be managed, but over time. And as you mentioned, in the 90s, the Ecovillages network, or the Ecovillages movement, got kind of started. And around that time too was when people began to use the language of conflict transformation, which has been what people have said over and over needs to be used and spoken to in communities that are going to stick together. So knowing that conflict is a sign of communal growth, what are some signs that it might not work out with a community or with a group of people? Do you know any signs? And what responsibility do you think ecovillages and new villagers could take to better weave together for over the long haul to create something for the coming generations too?
Yeah, I think that's a wise question, and I agree that unfortunately in today's society we go into two directions, trying to create conflict, which is a little bit more rare unless you're on Facebook, or conflict avoidant, which is much more real and tangible in daily life. And yeah, I would agree that in my household, I'm from the Northeast, or my family's from the Northeast, and conflict was very apparent all the time. I have no problem personally with conflict. Yeah, there was a lot of trauma and drama in the household from conflict, and so yeah, I think there's a balance that's to happen, but I think the word transformation is a great way to talk about it, you know. And I would advise anyone that's creating intentional community or living in one even, to look at conflict, to voice conflict, and to create social, what we've called in the movement, social hygiene measures, which means to air out conflict on a usual basis and to get into the habit in which we can communicate, even if it's like very small, you know, very minor. Like some of the biggest issues people face is like having dogs in the property, and where do you keep them, and like when can they be outside, and what is, you know, they tore up something, they're loud, blah blah blah. Other animals the same. And then cleanliness, not necessarily personal hygiene, but more so like leaving dishes in communal areas, or just not valuing communal spaces as far as cleanliness goes. And that is something I teach about a lot too, is like there is a spectrum of cleanliness, and there's comfortability around both sides, and that's a lot of what people face is, oh yeah, like this is what I thought clean was, and that's what someone else thinks clean is. And so there's just you know, not acknowledging that there's a differentiation of background and perspective, and that's, you know, an analogy of of deeper things, right? Like the cleaning of dishes. Yet I think that right there is like, okay, like when we discuss that, because the people that aren't like able to be as clean or not expecting that, they are not very comfortable when someone's telling them to be clean all the time, and then it's not a comfortable way to live. So I personally like cleanliness, but you know, I understand why it could be really uncomfortable. And so like when you're saying guidelines on anything, you really want to get into the very specifics, and you might have to talk about it 20 times, and that's part of it, is like, oh, we didn't get into that detail and you assumed what I was saying is something totally different than what I said. So I'm not necessarily answering your question, but conflict is a very weaving thing. What I will say, to answer directly your question is, yeah, I think, yeah, uncleanliness is actually a big sign that there's probably deeper conflict and there's avoidance happening. Yeah, having dishes in a communal sink, for instance, or unorganization in certain places. Other maybe, yeah, I would say like if you're not having spaces where people are able to talk more freely and not having like set agendas, yet having everyone there, maybe like heart circles is a great way, or grief circles, or even written notes, having different things to address, then you're probably having some people that are conflict avoidant and you're not able to address it soon enough until something really big happens. Other forms of conflict. What Diana Leaf Christian, who is like a really well-known elder, and she wrote Creating a Life Together, talks about is decision making is also often misdiagnosed as conflicts. So conflicts might arise, but it's actually because your governance structure isn't actually allowing for everyone to talk, to have power be dispersed throughout the community, and really just having like a set container that you can move through decisions quickly and fluidly, rather than getting stuck. And so she talks about sociocracy a lot, and I find that like that is really valuable, and I have seen the shift when you do learn, at least apply the tools of sociocracy, maybe not necessarily use it as a whole because it's a really complex decision-making governance system. Yeah, so that's what I would say. There's, like I said, it's very complex and it's detailed conversation conflict, but I'm happy to go into detail if you have other questions.
Sure. Is there anything that you'd like to go into detail about with sociocracy, since you brought it up,
I love sociocracy because it really disperses power dynamics, and it allows for introverts to have time to talk and extroverts to step back. Because it starts with the proposal, and anyone can create a proposal and submit it, and then it asks for everyone's opinion and input, and there's many rounds. And then also on a larger level, you have different teams, so like the farming or gardening team, the financial team, the animal team or lands team, the education department, you know, whatever your community is whatever its intentions and activities are, you would have different teams around it. Sometimes you do have a conflict resolution group, or council for healing and trauma and different things like that. And they all represent, you know, a group of people, and then they can still go to the general meeting, and then you're giving those different teams trust in that process, so that not everyone has to be stretched in every part of the community, yet you can also be in the general circle and have a voice there that then goes back to those spaces. So there's a lot of agreements being made in order for sociocracy teams to happen. But the biggest one is trust and yeah, trusting like that those groups are going to create the right decisions and also talk about things that need to be talked about on a larger sphere when needed. And I will just also plug that Diana will be speaking about sociocracy on our Grounding Your Village course coming up in February. So I'm just going to plug that right now.
Good. Thank you for sending out that plug, because I hope that people who watch this, even if it's 5 years from now, are still getting to attend Grounding Your Village or whatever it's morphed into at that point. And
I hope so too. That'd be great. And also more in person.
Yes, and more in person. That's right. So I'm kind of maybe one last question on that matter would be about maybe have you seen consensus work well, and maybe what are some of the subtle differences between consensus and sociocracy? Have you ever seen them blended together in any sort of way?
Sure, yeah. The most successful version of consensus is an 80-20, meaning that what consensus means is that everyone has to agree to pass a proposal. And so you can, that's a really hard thing, especially, well, if you have a partner, you know that it's hard to agree between two people. Now imagine 20 people in a space. That's not an easy feat. So, it allows for that 20% to not have a voice, or to there could always be the one person that wants to block things because they just feel like blocking things, and that's very unfortunate. Yet it gets really time consuming for a group to come together for meetings, and it just makes it not interesting. Now on the downside of that, then 20% becomes minoritized, and that's not a good feeling either, for a minority to start happening in a group. So I have seen it work to a degree. I think it's probably not necessarily sociocracy, because sociocracy makes a point of saying like we're an evolved consensus, and I'll get into the difference in a minute. But for me, I've seen it work, but more in a democratic way, where it's like, okay, we're doing consensus and we can all agree. And if that, doesn't go well, then we can have a vote after. And that way we can hear everyone's voice. But at the end of the day, we have a really easy system we can default, so it's not becoming too time consuming. And I have heard from other people, I've been immersed in sociocracy for so long, so I have a lot more experience with that. But I have heard it working well when people are used to, one, trusting each other in the process, and also they just are in the flow and understand how to make decisions move quickly and is in the best interest of the group rather than themselves. Now, sociocracy is way different in that it's not about everyone having consensus, but it's about having consent, which is actually a lot different in this term, which is that you are very rarely blocking anything, and you're more having concerns. So you have a concern around where you can talk about well, I don't feel like this is a good idea because, right? And so then the person that's creating the proposal, they get to adjust it until that person feels good. So it could be that there's more reviews around what's happening and there is more checking in. It could be that they change timelines about, this was supposed to be 6 months, but we made it into 1 month just to see if it works well, and then we'll change it to 6 months if it does work well. It could be applied to a different size group. And I'm not giving really any examples here, but I hope you're following it enough to understand what I'm saying. So yeah, consent is very different because yeah, there's no like, well, I say no. There are people that can, but usually again, it's urging them to be like, well, that's more of a concern. So let's find a way that it can, that the proposal can be edited so that it works out for everyone.
That's awesome. Yeah, yeah, it is something that I hope that anyone coming into a new community can look up and find out more about what the community's decision process is, and self-educate and take the community up on any pathways to education on the process, for the process to work well, regardless of what it is. Everybody needs to know what's going on, and that's from Robert's Rules of Order to sociocracy and all the new things coming up like holocracy and all that stuff. So for the sake of time, thank you for sharing about that question. I'm gonna move on to the last question here, and that's what makes you proud to be in the intentional communities movement, and what is your vision? And we can do this in two parts. So why don't we just start with that one? What makes you proud to be in the intentional communities movement right now, Chloe?
Yeah, I don't know about the word proud, but like I do think, well, I've done a lot of reflection recently because I started a podcast and it was initially about solution-based thinking, and I was really excited to talk about that because, you know, that's a lot of my life is like ecological and regenerative solution-based thinking, which is for me ecovillages. But then I decided like I'm going to step back on that. I don't think ecovillages aren't or intentional communities are for everyone, although their practices are. And I was thinking a lot more about eco grief and eco anxiety, which is so prevalent yet not discussed enough. So that's really what my podcast is about. And I started reflecting on like, well, you know, is intentional communities the only way? And why have I been thinking that for 10 years and this and that? And my answer is still yes, because I find that these spaces are very progressive and experimental. And it allows like for these containers where we are asking a lot of deep questions and we are able to try out new things. Of course, it has to all be agreed upon, yet, you know, you can take that back out into larger society and after you've tested it out, and it might not work on a larger basis, but it will still be spread, you know, like nonviolent communication is a great example of that, where it's like, yeah, there's a lot of communities that had to apply that over and over, and now it's being used more widely in like circling groups and different things like that. So yeah, I find that to be really interesting. And so yeah, for me, like I said, my background is an environmental activist, and my solution-based thinking is like, well, yeah, these spaces give me hope. They give me closure. It makes me feel like I'm not alone or lonely, and that is a huge issue, especially like with COVID, but way before that, honestly, like people become, especially in Western societies, way more isolated time and time again. So yeah, I find that to be, I just find it to be a solution to so many issues, classism, not so much racism or diversity, honestly. I think that's one place we're really lacking. And it can start getting cultish because, or I won't say cultish, although I've been also saying that a lot. Another conversation. It's more like there's just so much lack of diversity because you want to find people with the same values and priorities as you, and unfortunately a lot of the time it is the people that are in your direct culture and the people you feel most familiar with. So I do want to break that barrier. That's really strong to my heart. Yet once people do find those skills and learn to do things that way, I'll also plug another person who's an acquaintance of mine, Crystal Bird Farmer, and she wrote a book called The Token, and I highly recommend that book for people that want to have more diversity in many ways, from disability to orientation, and sexuality to obviously people of color. So yeah, I'm going on that tangent to say, like, yeah, I think there's a lot of great things, and I would encourage more of a look of let's be inclusive, because that is going to be one of the biggest issues of our time is like, oh great, all these white communities are taking over Costa Rica, for instance, and Nicaragua, and they're in their safe little bubbles, but what about everywhere else? Like, I just looked at in Indonesia, they're moving the capital because of climate change. Like, that is ridiculous. And yet we're sitting here and arguing whether climate change is real or not in the US. It's like, so anyways, I'm getting a little fired up, but I hope I answered your question.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I wanna tend that fire and invite it to flare. We're here, maybe at the very last question here is, and this is what you're already speaking to, but what is your vision then for all the many communities of the world, all the different intentional communities, and for any new communards who may be watching this, or who may not be watching this, but who are, checking community out or deciding to move in or moving in today? What's your vision?
Yeah, I think for me, it would be about creating accessibility to these spaces that are so idyllic. I think land in general needs to become more accessible. I've been getting a lot into the crowdfunding and pitch deck and investor world the last year, and again, I find that to be really critical skills to learn, because there's so much money out there. It's just about creating your image, your branding, and accessing those people's hearts, and I don't think it's that hard to do, to be honest. It's just, well, it's a lot of work, but it's not hard to do on an emotional level. That being said, yeah, I think have a good idea. We already all have the idea, it's just not enough people doing it. There's not enough people taking this seriously. And once you do have these ideas of creating more accessibility, I really think that it can shift what land regeneration looks like, living collectively on land, growing food collectively. I love maker spaces. I love the idea that tech and maker spaces or homesteading combines. I'm really excited by all those things. Yet, it doesn't have to be that lofty to start. Like, we can all start somewhere. We can start in an urban environment just as much as a rural environment. And I think it's about making this more and more normalized, so more people are excited to live this way. They realize that it's a solution to environmental issues. It's the solution, again, to classist issues. It's a solution to health issues in some ways if you do it right. I think overall health, it's very, very healthy. And yeah, I think that if we were all to live more this way, or live more collectively, whatever that looks like, we would be a happier world.
Wow. Well, Chloe, thank you for sharing your vision. Thank you for taking this time and this energy. I mean, all of this is wonderful content for anyone stepping new on this journey. And I think I just want to thank all the people who brought this together, and anyone who may be watching. And is there anything else you'd like to mention or say before we finish the video?
No, I didn't talk about the nonprofit that much. It's Full Systems Network. growingsystems.org. And I would love for you to go there and visit if you're interested in learning more. And I obviously am very passionate about this, love to talk about it, and am also accessible myself. So thanks so much, Valerian, for reaching out and having this conversation with me.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and absolutely everyone go check out Whole Systems Network, and yeah, and keep in touch with the grounding your communities things going on. And thanks again for joining us, Chloe. All right.